Joining us for today's conversation is Reverend Phil Dieke. Phil is a Texas Impact board member and staff member at Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary and is joining us for the conversation. Phil, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to be here.
I am always so excited to see the work that you're doing up in the Dallas area. You are the chair of the Board of Church and Society for the North Texas Annual Conference, I believe. He fact checks himself on air. Great. And you all have a series of events, but had one recently helping people figure out how they can be better advocates. So I guess first question is, why is that role so important to you?
Yeah, so I joined the Board of Church and Society because you get nominated. And so I joined it as I was nominated. And
congratulations.
Then, thank you so much. I'll put my little crown on here for that one. No, but then shortly after the board chair moved conferences and said, I think Phil should take over as the chair. And I was like, I just joined. And I learned that a lot by being a part of that a lot of it was, a lot of churches don't know what to do with church and society. And so they know of it. We have social principles. We have a lot of things, but like they don't actually know how to enact that at local churches. And so one of the things I really wanted to set out to do was figure out how do we help churches take that next step of really embracing this work of justice work in congregations. And so I started asking questions of the General Board of Church and Society. And so if you're listening and don't know, the General Board of Church and Society is kind of the denominational aspect of our advocacy justice work in the denomination. And then most conferences will have a conference-wide board, which is what I chair, and then some local churches then have their own boards as well. And so the church I was serving at the time, we were trying to figure out how do we launch, and there was no playbook.
Right.
And so I went back to the general board and said, hey, what do we do? How do we? And they were just kind of like, well, just start meeting and have conversations about justice and then do actions that follow that. And I was like, okay, we're going to start working on a playbook. And then how would you feel about blessing that and adapting that to be something we can, and we have not finished the playbook by any means, but so much so that the general board actually said, we hear you and we think this is a priority. And so they're actually working on this year, getting a book out that'll, or kind of a pamphlet that will say, if you as the local church want to engage in justice work, here's some steps you can take to really launch this in your local congregation. And so I'm proud about that.
Yeah.
That like the North Texas Conference is really pushing that ball to get that.
You're doing some great work. I'm actually on the Board of Church and Society in the Texas Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. So we've had similar conversations. But what does that look like if you're doing it well?
In the local church?
If a local church is doing it well, yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that what I've found in a lot of churches is they want to do the work, and I'm gonna categorize people here as we love to do, right? What I found often is that people love to do the research of the work. They love to study. They love to read the books. They love to have the conversations. But when it actually comes to engaging in the action of that work, well, that's a lot harder. You know, it's kind of that whole mentality of like, we'll even show up sometimes and we'll serve in the food lines, or we'll, do the clothes things, and like kind of the almost like the more the mercy work things,
right. Love our charity.
We do, right? And like we've kind of set ourselves up for that. So we only have ourselves to blame, I think. But to actually engage in the justice work is really hard.
Yeah.
And that's because it starts asking a lot of the systemic questions and like really addressing things that aren't just about like feeding somebody who's hungry, but like asking the questions of like, why are there hungry people? And then start like working on policy that like engages in that, right? And like challenging systems that continue to perpetuate why people are hungry. And like, that's really hard work, right? Yeah. And that's more than like, you can read a book about it, but like, then you got to start like showing up and learning who your representatives are and who your city council members are, and having conversations and saying like, we are people of faith and we believe that people shouldn't be hungry because we think that there are an abundance of resources and that they need to be evenly distributed for people so that people aren't hungry, because dear God, why are people hungry in the United States of America, right? Like much less anywhere in the world, right? So those are really like great questions to ask, but then you have to take that next step of like, now how are we going to act on it?
Are there churches or groups that you've seen do that well?
Sometimes. I mean, there are, right? Like for sure. I wish I could list you a whole bunch of Methodist ones, but like the reality is like, no. And I think that's because, I mean, we're having the same thing in the North Texas Conference, where we gathered at this event earlier in the summer where people said like, we have this issue we're passionate about, and this issue and this issue. And we had John Hill from the general board come and talk, and he listed a whole, like laundry list of things that we say that we're passionate about in the Methodist Church, which is great. And like we a lot of resources, and we do a lot of advocacy work around those things. But the reality is we end up pulling ourselves and wearing ourselves so thin on the various issues that we're concerned about, that we don't actually do a lot of great work on one specific issue. So one thing I think of is like, I saw Wilshire Baptist years ago say, we're going to take on payday loans.
Right.
And like in partnership with Friendship Weston, like they did, and they made movement on payday loans in North Texas. And so like, I think there's something about getting real specific about one or maybe two issues and saying, we're going to take this on and we're going to make movement here. And it's not that you can't be concerned about other things, because the reality is like, we have to be concerned about all these different things, right? Like one of the things that I'll probably bring up over and over again is that as United Methodists, we really profess this idea of do no harm. And so to do no harm means we have to do a lot of work around the situations where harm is being done. And so you can't just focus on payday loans, or you can't just focus on poverty, like alleviation. You know, there's just a lot of things that cause harm to people. So of course we need to engage in a lot of different aspects. So what we're trying to encourage congregations to do in North Texas is say, really like do the work of having conversations in your community and in your congregation about what you are passionate about, and then whittle it down to two and focus on two for a year. Right. And then like reassess the next year. And if you want to continue on in one of those, like if you have a primary and a secondary, move your secondary to your primary and then adopt your secondary. Like, so we're trying to figure out ways that we can help resource and really like do some discerning around what are the things that we really are passionate about, instead of just having our fingertips in so many different like pools.
I will say a good example of that. So First United Methodist Church of Austin really locked in for a significant period of time working on maternal health and worked on that Medicaid expansion, House Bill 12 that ended up passing this time. But they did a ton of work on that, showed up at the Capitol, did some great work. So there are churches that are doing that well.
And I should say, I should say, like, let me say that I know Oaklawn United Methodist Church in North Texas has really been incredible with housing our neighbors who are underhoused in North Texas, especially when it's cold outside. And then they've also adapted that to bring in migrants coming up from the border in a ways that actually like moved policy in Dallas. So they got slapped with like fine after fine after fine of like housing people when they weren't permitted to house people. But they basically were like, great, keep finding us, but we are going to do this because we're not going to let people just die on the streets because it's so cold outside. Yeah. And so like Oaklawn's done that. I also know that like First UMC Dallas Downtown has done a great job with literacy programs and reading and adopting schools and saying we're going to connect one adult with one kid. And so the interesting thing is, so often you have nonprofits that like end up spouting out of these things. So Oaklawn's birthed Dallas Responds, 1+1 program was started. Like, so it's interesting to me that like when a congregation gets really passionate about something, they end up starting a 501c3 about it, because it's just so hard to do that work in a local church.
Well, it is hard to do it in a local church because there are just so many factors at play. But one of the strengths of a connectional church or a connectional community of faith is that we can all find people who think and want to engage in ministry similar to us. And United Women of Faith being a great example with their legislative event every year, where 200-ish United Women of Faith and friends from across Texas come in and have a lobby day. But another expression of that is through denominational bodies, judicatories, annual conferences in United Methodist perspective, passing resolutions or statements of beliefs on public policy issues or other things, usually with a call to action. And North Texas has been a leader in kind of pushing resolutions and pushing the church forward on that. So do you want to talk about that process some?
Yeah, I didn't know a lot about this before last year, when actually Texas Impact helped me come up with a resolution about voting, actually.
Right.
And so I was real excited about that, and we got that passed in North Texas. This year, I actually missed annual conference.
Hopefully the bishop isn't listening
don't tell
today.
The bishop.
Yeah.
Which I was really sad about, because I had a colleague say it was the best annual conference I've ever been to.
Right.
For a variety of reasons, but. Yeah, I mean, the thing about resolutions, and especially in conference levels in the Methodist Church, is they're pretty much all aspirational, right? So you're saying things that you want ideally to happen, but the General Conference is really the only body that speaks for the Methodist Church, the United Methodist Church as a whole. And so we did actually pass a resolution about deacons in sacramental authority that required 80% people like voting to pass to go to General Conference. So like that resolution will now go to General Conference in 2024 to be voted on actually by the body to potentially change policy or polity for our denomination. With that said, do resolutions, like, I don't want to say work. What's the point of resolutions? I think in some ways it's important to say who we want to be, right? To put a vision out there of like, this is really who we aspire to be as a conference, as a denomination, as a people of faith. And so in that way, I think it's great to say like, this is a resolution we're going to pass. I'll be totally honest that I have some colleagues who think it's very performative. Like, you just do this because you want to get up there and push your agenda on things. Like, and does that happen? Of course, I'm sure it does, right? A lot of times. The reality being, though, like, it's important if we're only going to gather once a year as a conference to be able to come together and say, these are the things that we as clergy people and lay people who represent our conference find great passion in. And we want to be able to say, like, this is what we aspire to as a conference. And like, are all of us going to agree on it? No, like rarely does a resolution pass with 100% backing behind it. But like, that's the whole point of it though, right? Is that like we can continue to be in ministry and in faith together. And what I hope, and this is part of the work of church and society too, is like, then we provide resources for our congregations to say like, well, if you don't understand or if you don't necessarily agree with this resolution, then like, have an opportunity to have a conversation with somebody who either wrote the resolution or is supporting it to say like, why is it that you believe this way? Because if we can't have conversations about it, what are we doing here, right? Like, and this just leads to greater polarization that we're seeing across our country.
Yeah. At their best, though, I'll argue there's significant value in resolutions. I mean, a year ago at this time, we were talking about the tragedy in Uvalde, right?
Sure.
And so the North Texas Annual Conference this year passed a resolution calling on people of faith to help end gun violence in the state of Texas with some specific policy proposals. And I know our ending gun violence team asked for a copy of that resolution. Yeah. My guess is that'll end up in the hands of legislators to say, hey, people of faith like feel pretty strongly about this, but it also opens up those conversations with people in local congregations.
No, that's a great example, Scott.
The church believes in this. Like, let's have a chat. And part of that resolution was, vote for candidates who support ending gun violence in the state of Texas.
And one of the things I love our conference did this year was we had committees to actually discuss resolutions this time, as opposed to just, last year when I presented on the voting resolution, I just brought it to the floor and there was some conversation about it and then it was voted on. Now there's actually committees that are like having conversations before it even gets brought to the floor. And I think that's important, right? Like we've got to be able to talk to each other about these things and engage in because we're doing theological work here, right? Engage in the theology of it and then engage in the practical, we're Methodists or United Methodists, we're good people of experience, right? So what's the lived experience of people who are bringing forth this resolution and why it's important to those who are affected by the resolution or not having the resolution. So
do you think you'll see more of that? So for listeners, many of you have probably heard the United Methodist Church has been through quite a year with half of the churches in my annual conference having left to be a part of a new denomination. Others have lost quite a few people as well. Do you think, given, I don't want to say the split, but the schism, the exodus of some churches, do you think you'll be seeing more resolutions, more justice work? What's your feeling about the future?
I do feel that way, and this may be my own bias, that the congregations that I've been involved with around justice work, let me put it this way, the ones who left were not the ones who were involved in church and society work. I think that's the most diplomatic way I can put that.
That is very diplomatic, yes.
So in some ways, like when our clergy met back at the beginning of the year, I think it was, or end of last year, I can't remember exactly when, we had our clergy gathering, and we met with the Central Texas Conference as well, because our bishop is over both conferences now. And I'm pretty sure we're going to probably be one conference before too long, but who am I to shake the magic 8-ball here, right?
But you're not going to say that on air, right?
I don't pull those strings, luckily. But we had that conversation of, you know what, if people are leaving and there are people who haven't necessarily been involved in a lot of this justice work, well, then now's our time, right? Like now's our time where in some ways we have the opportunity to act as a new church start, or like as this kind of like new momentum, new energy, new life. And like we've done the process of grieving, right? Like, and not that grieving's ever really done, but like we've taken the time to honor the churches that have decided to leave, and we've blessed them, and we've said blessings to you as you go forward. Now we're here, and all of us who have remained, like it's time to get work done, right? And it's time to embrace the justice work that is before us, and to start acting on these things, and actually get some energy and momentum around this idea of like there's no opportunity but now, right? Like here we are. Let's get down to our roots of who we are, about being people of justice for the people, right? Like John Wesley was with the people in the coal fields, in the coal mines. And like, I mean, he was out with people, engaging those on the margins so often and representing them and doing the theological work to connect like why God has a preferential treatment for the poor, right? Like he did that kind of work and got his hands dirty with those people. And so like, I think our time is now to really get out there and be with the people and represent people that are on the margins and do the theological connections there too.
Our time is now. Phil, our last several weeks we've had guests on, and I've given them an opportunity to give our listeners a homework assignment. Yeah. So I'm going to give you a chance to preach here at the end. Ooh. What do you hope our listeners will do during this legislative interim period?
Is there going to be a legislative interim period?
I don't know. I'm hoping,
So this is what I charged our when we had our event in the beginning of summer for Church and Society, and this is just kind of grassroots work 101. But like, what I really encourage everyone to do is go back to your congregations and find five people to have the conversation with of whatever you're most passionate about, and invite them into the work, whether that's exploring what that looks like theologically, politically, like whatever the case may be. Like, do the homework part of it, like to educate yourselves. But then with those 5 people, go and meet with your city council member. Go and this is what you say all the time to Scott, right? Like, this is right out of your,
we can share content,
book, but like, be known to your elected officials, and do so not just when they're in session, but like when they're back at their home districts and stuff too. Take the time to actually go and meet them and become a familiar face to them, so that it's not just that you're always like wanting something from them, right? But that like it really is a relationship, and that's the reality is what it should be. Is this is a two-way street of it's a representative democracy. So like, let's have them know who they're representing and what you and your 5 people are really passionate about. Whether that's creation justice or whether that is poverty alleviation, whatever the case may be, but like, do the work to find those 5 people that can engage this work with you, because it's lonely. It can be really lonely and it can be really exhausting. So find your 5 people that can do this work with you, and then build a team out of it. And again, the time is now, and get to work. The time is now. And Reverend Phil Dieke, I'm glad we're on the same team. So thanks for the time today, and thanks for all you do. Appreciate you. Absolutely. Grateful for all you all do.